House prices show strength even as the Reserve Bank prepares for a 20% slump in prices. It's a massive week for the economy with the federal budget tomorrow night and inflation figures on Wednesday set to provide insight into future rate rises, and the first cargo ship with a sail set to reach port today. It's Monday, the 24th of October, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Good weekend?
Yeah, pretty ordinary weekend. How about you? That's not an exciting way to start, though, is it?
No, it's not. You've had illness in your household, haven't you? 3 of the 4 of you, not you, but the other 3. Sean and the kids haven't been so well.
Yeah, no, but I am I was about to say the lone survivor, but that's not the best way to say it either. No, it's not quite that dire. So no, going okay. Did you have a good weekend?
I did. Now, Fear and Greed. We need our listeners' help, Michael.
We do. And really the goal here is to make sure that we can keep Fear and Greed free for our audience long into the future. And to do that, obviously, we need the support of advertisers. We need to know what you want to hear. We need to know kind of what news and information are relevant to you, to your business, to your investments. And to do that, basically, we're running a short survey. It is anonymous. It only takes a few minutes, and you can find the link in today's show notes. And really, it is enormously helpful. 3 minutes of your time. That's all it'll take.
3 minutes of your time will help us out incredibly. As you said, Michael, show notes, or just go to LinkedIn or Facebook, one of those sorts of places, and you'll find a link to the survey. It won't take you long. Please go and do it today.
I love it when you talk about social media, Sean, because it sounds so natural. Sorry, that seems a little mean, doesn't it? Anyway, you've got a good chat coming up today. Obviously, it's Monday. We tend to do investing, really, a bit of an investing theme for the interview for the Monday show. Today, you're speaking with Brett Reynolds from Tiger Brokers Australia.
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a different take because Brett is more of a trader rather than a long-term investor. And one of the things, he just talks about how he goes through the processes of what he would invest in, what he wouldn't invest in. He's quite specific about some companies that he likes, that he doesn't like. And he also talks a lot about selling. He said it's buying and selling. It's not just buying. We always hear about what we should buy. Also, you should sell and you should know when to sell. So definitely an interesting chat and worth listening to if you're an investor or interested in investing.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we're not an investing podcast, and it is important to make sure that you do get professional advice before making any investment decisions. But on with the show, Sean, the main story today, it may have been wet across many capital cities on the weekend. And there might have been more houses on the market, but the national auction clearance rate remained above 60% over the weekend. It's a pretty decent result, and it came as secret research. I love that, secret research. Always sounds very exotic, doesn't it? Showed that the Reserve Bank has modelled what would happen if house prices sank 20%.
That's right. Now, let's have a look at the clearance rates first. Across the capital cities, the preliminary clearance rate, according to CoreLogic, was nearly 63%, up a couple of points from last week. And the number of registered bidders at auctions also rose sharply. Now, the average number of registered bidders is now 10, which is actually very, very high. In Melbourne, the clearance rate over the weekend was 64.6%, while Sydney it was 61.6%. Large family homes, fully renovated properties, and those located in premium suburbs attracted the most competition, according to the Financial Review, and anecdotally at least, there was some renewed confidence among buyers. Away from the 2 largest cities, Adelaide's clearance rate was 75%, Brisbane was up nearly 4 points to 49%, while the ACT was down a bit to 58%.
Sean, tell me more about the secret research. The Reserve Bank's worried about a big drop in the housing market.
Yes, well, it was actually obtained by media outlets through freedom of information, which that's why we can call it secret research. It's not something the bank necessarily wanted to put out there, but the FOI got it to us. It talks about what would happen if prices fell by 20%. It doesn't mean the Reserve Bank thinks that's going to happen. In fact, as far as we can tell, they think it'll fall by about 10% or so. But it's certainly thinking and modelling what would happen to the market if prices fell 20% from their peaks. Now, that would happen if people became increasingly pessimistic about the property market, either due to rising interest rates or because falling prices spark a downward spiral in the market. But we must remember the bank's baseline case is about half that level. Now remember, by the end of last month, prices were falling at their fastest pace in more than 40 years thanks to poor affordability, a jump in listings, a drop in home buyer confidence, and the big one, higher interest rates. So far in Sydney, house prices are down nearly 10%. In Melbourne, it's almost 6%. The other capital cities in the regions are somewhat lower than that. So for the Reserve Bank to be talking about 20%, that's a lot further to go. And it is just interesting that it's at least turning its attention to it.
Yeah, it sure is. So how did local markets finish on Friday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed the day down nearly 1% to 6,677 points. For the week, it was down just over 1%. On Friday, the banks were sold off sharply, with National Australia Bank down 1.8%, while Commonwealth Bank fell 1.5%, and Westpac and ANZ dropped more than 1%. Industrial property giant Goodman Group and QBE Insurance were both off 3%, while Wesfarmers and Brambles lost 2%. Now, among the large caps, the energy companies did best, with Woodside up 2.4%. Santos was about 1% higher. Not surprising, we seem to say it all the time. Coal miners had a good day. They jumped sharply, with Whitehaven up 5% after completing a 10% share buyback. It has plans to do more. New Hope spiked 7%. One interesting one, Life 360 rose 7% after announcing a price increase in its US products, but the best of the day was Telix Pharmaceutical, following a business update on Thursday. Property and investment group Home Consortium was the worst of the top 200 on Friday, down nearly 5%.
And international markets, what's been happening?
It was actually a really strong weekend on Wall Street, with the broad-based S&P 500 and the tech-heavy Nasdaq both jumping more than 2%. We talk about how the energy companies are doing well in Australia. Well, that's a global phenomenon. For example, ExxonMobil hit a record high over the weekend on Wall Street. There was also some good news for the Aussie dollar, which has jumped 1.6% to almost 64 US cents. Go, you good thing. And Michael, I'd like to talk a little bit about diesel today, because about 2 weeks ago, you said to me, why is diesel so expensive? And since then, 3 or 4 people have asked me exactly the same question.
Oh, can I just say, before you even get into this, I am so glad that you're doing this, because on Saturday, I went to fill up our car, and it's quite a large 4-wheel drive, and I was outraged. At the petrol station, I paid nearly $2.35 per litre for diesel. The petrol bowsers next to me, the maximum was $1.75 for unleaded petrol. That is a huge difference between the two. And I sent off a number of very angry text messages to a number of people, and I'm surprised I left you off that list, and I apologise for that.
Well, I'm going to give you the reason why it is so expensive.
Good. Thank you. Now I've finished my rant. Please go on.
Good. So diesel, it's actually named after its inventor, a German guy called Rudolf Diesel. It's refined from crude oil and biomass materials, and it's used widely in heavy vehicle industries. It's also a backup power source in some places. It's also used in some lighter vehicles, i.e. your car. And as you said, $2.30 a litre, very expensive at the moment. There's a bunch of reasons for it. Oil prices are high, we know that, and it is a global market, so events that happen in somewhere like France, such as the recent 3-week strike by diesel refinery workers, pushes up the global price of diesel. That's one. 2, Russian exports will be banned from early next year. Third one, heading into winter, the US has the lowest seasonal inventories level of diesel since data was first collected in 1982. This is probably the big one. There's just not a lot stored in the US, and the Biden administration is talking about capping exports. All that makes for much higher diesel prices.
All right. Well, I'm still outraged, but at least I understand a little bit more now why the prices are so high. It doesn't make me feel any better about it.
Fair enough. It's lucky that you live in an area which really needs a diesel 4-wheel drive to get around.
You're just getting me back for my social media remark at the start of the show now, aren't you?
Absolutely, yeah. Too right.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the flood crisis is now focused on New South Wales and southeastern Queensland after Victorian rivers started to recede.
Yes, there's widespread flood warnings across New South Wales, from Lismore in the north to Moama in the south of the state and through western areas, particularly around Gunnedah and Moree. Emergency Services Minister Steph Cook said there was literally a flood risk in every corner of the state. And the Bureau of Meteorology said more rainfall is expected with little respite in sight. Meanwhile, parts of southeast Queensland are expecting dangerous flash flooding, with 200 millimetres expected to hit the region overnight. Northwestern Victoria seems to have avoided more heavy flooding, with flood levels having peaked, assuming no more heavy rain. Now, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese called on residents right down the east coast, from Queensland to Tasmania, to remain vigilant. Please do.
Yes, indeed. Sean, Australia has officially signed up to President Joe Biden's global pledge to reduce methane emissions by 30% over the decade.
The livestock sector, mainly what comes out of cattle and sheep basically, is responsible for about half the country's methane emissions. Now, those methane emissions make up around 25% of Australia's total greenhouse gas emissions. So getting on top of that is important. Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen said the government would work closely with the agribusiness sector to reduce methane emissions. He said the process would not involve new taxes or livestock reductions. So what's it mean? Mostly it's about feed. And in fact, one way to reduce methane emissions from cattle is feed them seaweed.
Really? Seaweed?
Seaweed.
You could also just buy a whole lot of corks.
You have just absolutely hammered the credibility of this podcast for that particular comment. Oh, let's go on.
It's a little bit hard to recover after that one, Sean, but it is a massive week in the world of economics, with the federal budget due for release tomorrow night and September quarter inflation out on Wednesday.
So what do we know about the budget? Mostly it's about the implementation of election promises, plus a few other bits and pieces. Yesterday, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said it would be focused on delivering Labor's election promises, including cheaper childcare, healthcare, paid parental leave and the National Broadband Network. Treasurer Jim Chalmers said there'd be an extra $33 billion in pension and other welfare payments. That's all thanks to inflation. They'll also be spending on renewable energy and infrastructure and more on TAFE and universities. There won't be much on stage 3 tax cuts, but there will be before they're due to be implemented in about 2 years' time. In economic terms, the budget deficit this financial year will be lower than projected last March, thanks to higher commodity prices, but there'll still be big deficits beyond this year. The government will also, in all likelihood, downgrade its economic growth forecasts.
And what's the market expecting from those inflation figures?
Well, market economists reckon September quarter CPI will come in around 7%, up from 6.1% in the June quarter. And most, including the Reserve Bank, think it will climb higher during this current December quarter. That probably means the Reserve Bank will lift rates when it meets next week. And again, the smart money is on 25 basis points, but it could be more. One of the big issues for the local economy is how poorly the global economy is faring. On Thursday night, Australian time, US growth figures will be released. Also this week, the central banks of Canada and Europe meet. They're tipped to lift interest rates, while the Bank of Japan meets on Friday. It'll probably do not much, which is what it's been doing for a couple of years now.
All right. Now, Sean, if there's one thing I love as much as plane stories, it is boat and ship stories. And so I'm very excited about this one. A bulk carrier, as in a massive cargo ship, is going to arrive in the port of Newcastle in the next few days, equipped with a 54-metre high sail.
Yes, it's part of efforts to make vessels more efficient, though it does seem like something from 200 years ago. The Shofu Maru is on its maiden voyage from Japan. It's expected to berth at Newcastle on the central coast of New South Wales today or tomorrow. It will load about 100,000 tonnes of coal mined by BHP and head back to Japan, according to the Financial Review. It's the first in the world equipped with a new type of hard sail, known as Wind Challenger, and the goal, of course, is to cut carbon emissions. So we have a massive tanker coming in via wind power.
Did you know, Sean, that there is, we've talked about the Flight Radar 24, the app that you can use to watch planes. Did you know there's one that you can use to watch ships as well?
Is there really?
It's called Boat Watch.
Boat Watch, okay, I'll get that.
Yeah, it's good fun. It's not quite as kind of accurate, also because
things don't move quite as much either.
they move pretty steadily, but it is still fun to watch it. So I bet you if you download that today, you will be able to find the Shofu Maru. Is that how you said it?
Yes, that's how I said it.
Excellent. All right. Moving on to overseas news now. Sean, Chinese President Xi Jinping has been given a third 5-year term as president of China, as expected.
Yes, President Xi vowed yesterday to work diligently, saying the world needs China. It comes at the end of a week-long National People's Congress, which affirmed President Xi standing as supreme leader. The Congress itself was pretty much as expected, but perhaps the most telling part of the week was the focus that President Xi put on security and nationalism rather than the economy. There's also no mention of rolling back the zero-tolerance stance on COVID. Clearly, the focus in Beijing is all about the might and power of China. That's not necessarily a good thing for Australia because, of course, we really do rely on the world's second largest economy to be buying our commodities.
Now, Sean, the two prime contenders to be the next UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, held face-to-face talks over the weekend aiming to come to some sort of deal.
That sentence is quite incredible. The two prime contenders, Rishi Sunak, I get. Boris Johnson. You would not have expected 6 weeks ago that we would have been using his name in reference to another potential Prime Minister. Incredible. The former Prime Minister and ex-Chancellor spoke as some Tory MPs called on them to put aside their differences and reach a deal that would see one of them take over as Prime Minister and the other serve in a senior cabinet position, according to Bloomberg. The two became bitter enemies over the Northern Summer when Sunak resigned as Chancellor of Johnson's cabinet, a move that helped trigger the then Prime Minister's downfall. Now, Mr Johnson is currently trailing behind Sunak with far fewer public endorsements from members of Parliament, though his campaign team claimed he has over 100 privately backing him. Penny Mordaunt, who appears to have less support than either, is actually the only person to have publicly declared their candidacy. By the end of this week, we should know who the new PM is.
All right, and finally, Sean, the founder of Red Bull, Austrian billionaire Dietrich Mateschitz, has died aged 78.
He was very much the face of Red Bull, which is an Austrian Thai conglomerate. Red Bull, which of course is a drink and sells in 172 countries, now operates football clubs, ice hockey teams and F1 racing teams and has contracts with hundreds of athletes in various sports. Mr Mateschitz and a Thai investor founded the company in 1984 after the Austrian recognised the potential in marketing a Thai drink called Krutting Den to a Western audience. Mateschitz worked on the formula for 3 years before the modified drink was launched under its new name in his native Austria back in 1987. The group now sells about 10 billion cans of the caffeine drink each year. Incredible.
That is a huge number.
Yeah, I mean, amazing story, really, what Mr. Mateschitz did for Red Bull.
Yes, indeed. All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and today you're speaking with Brett Reynolds from Tiger Brokers.
Yes, as I mentioned at the top of the show, great one if you're an investor, as much as anything, because he talks about the need to sell, not just buy.
It's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And don't forget to listen to Fear and Greed the week ahead, featuring Sherelle Murphy, who is filling in still for Stephen Koukoulas.
That's right, and she's very excited. She's got the budget this week, inflation, I mean, perfect week for an economist. And Sherelle tells us all about what she expects is going to happen.
All right, thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 24th of October, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And don't forget to please take that survey, a short 3-minute anonymous survey. You'll find it in today's show notes. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.